"Sir, you need to step away from the dock immediately." The officer's voice lands like a command sharpened by habit. Not certainty, loud, procedural, automatic. But beneath it there's something else, something faint and instinctive. Like the flicker of a match before flame decides whether it wants to live or die. His hand hovers near his belt, not gripping, not threatening, just preparing, because that's what they're trained to do when they think they're approaching a problem. The part no one trained him for is realizing he isn't looking at a problem. He's standing on top of one, and he doesn't know it yet. I don't move, not an inch. The lake is dead calm, like glass stretched thin over quiet land, and the reflection of his badge glitters on the surface as though the water itself is watching this unfold. Behind him, a crowd of HOA-groomed spectators clusters along the boardwalk in carefully pressed athleisure and practiced superiority. They came here expecting a spectacle, a neat, clean humiliation of an outsider, a display of power without risk, a public reminder that belonging in Lake Reserve is something granted, never assumed, and above all of them, like some ornamental gargoyle carved out of entitlement, is Delilah Whitmore, elbows perched on the railing of her $1 million deck, chin lifted, smile thin enough to cut a finger on. She thinks this is the moment her HOA gets to show teeth. She thinks she's minutes away from validation. She thinks authority, like money, always obeys her. But she's already losing, and she has no idea. The officer repeats himself, because protocol requires repeating yourself when you think someone hasn't understood. But I understood perfectly. I heard you, I say calmly. That's when the first thread of confusion pulls across his face, because people who are caught trespassing don't usually sound like they're holding the high ground. They protest, they panic, they bargain, they comply. They don't smile, and I am smiling. Not big, just enough for him to feel something is off kilter. Like a door he thought was locked, creaking open behind him, Delilah calls out from behind him, sharp as cracked crystal, "Officer, remove him! He has no right to be here." She wants to own this moment so badly she's practically leaning forward to catch it with her teeth. "I'm exactly where I have the right to be," I answer without looking at her. The cop squares his shoulders. "Sir, this shoreline is HOA-controlled property, and you were reported for trespassing." "Reported," I repeat, nodding slowly. "But not confirmed." The way his eyes flicker, just a millimeter, tells me he caught the difference. Behind him, someone mutters, "What's he talking about?" Perfect doubt isn't loud in its beginning. It arrives like a shift in gravity, something the body notices before the mind admits. Delilah bristles. "This is private land. This dock is maintained and protected by Lake Reserve residents. You don't belong here." She says that like she's handing down a sentence, not speaking a sentence. It's always the same tone people use when they believe geography is destiny. We live here. Therefore, we own everything touching the horizon. I finally turn just enough to look back up at her deck. Not at her. Not at her posture. Just at the wood beams her property rests on. The same way a surgeon studies the hinge of a bone before breaking it back into alignment. "You keep using the word own," I say. "You should be more careful with it," the officer interrupts before she can shriek again. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back for me." "And I'm telling you," I reply, voice steady, "you're standing on property that doesn't belong to her, or to the HOA, or to anyone in that crowd." He hesitates. That's the first turn. When an officer hesitates before reissuing a command, it means somewhere in his instincts a tiny whisper has already started. What if I'm aiming in the wrong direction? I can feel the energy of the onlookers start to change. The confidence drains just a fraction. The stillness around us tightens. "You need to leave the dock," he says. "No," I answer, calm as the lake beneath us. "You need to understand where you're standing," Delilah explodes. "This is not his property. This is HOA land, and that shoreline is protected by covenant." "That would only work," I cut in, "if the HOA's covenant was attached to the deed of the lake bed beneath it." She freezes. The officer blinks. There it is. The first crack of real panic behind her eyes. Because that sentence, that single, surgical sentence, is not something a trespasser says. That is something an owner says. Someone in the back of the crowd whispers, "The lake bed?" The officer shifts his stance, and for the first time, he looks down. Not at me, not at the crowd, not at the boardwalk, but at the dock beneath his own shoes, as though suddenly curious about what it is physically attached to. Not HOA land. Something deeper, something earlier, something recorded. "You're bluffing," Delilah breathes. But her voice betrays her, higher pitch, throat tight. "You are absolutely bluffing. If I were bluffing," I say. Lifting the small waterproof deed tube slowly into view, "I wouldn't be holding the paperwork you forgot existed." Her face drops so fast it looks like gravity remembered her before she did. The officer's eyes land on the tube like it's a loaded weapon. He doesn't reach for it yet. Not because he doubts it, but because instinctively he understands that the moment he touches it, the hierarchy of this situation officially rearranges itself. "Where did you get that?" he asks. "Same place you'd get jurisdiction," I answer. "From the county records archive." "You're lying," Delilah snaps. "If I were lying," I say without looking at her, "you wouldn't be shaking." She stiffens. Involuntary. Undeniable. And now the crowd sees it. Her mask slips. HOA royalty bleeding into mortal panic. The officer speaks again, but softer. "I need to verify." "You will," I reply. But verification doesn't change ownership. It only confirms it. Silence falls over the dock. Not awkward silence. Not hesitant silence. The kind of silence creation holds before thunder chooses where to land. And then, slowly, deliberately, I step forward and place the deed tube into the officer's hand. He doesn't tug it. He doesn't snatch it. He receives it. Because on some level, his authority has already shifted direction, like a compass needle that finally stops resisting true north. He unscrews the cap, pulls the first sheet free. His brow tightens, his breathing changes, and in his silence, the entire crowd realizes this was never a trespassing call. This was a jurisdiction transfer. Delilah tries one last flailing strike. "That document is irrelevant. We have HOA precedent." I turn to her fully now, and the calm in my voice slices cleaner than a shout ever could. "You don't own what sits below the waterline. You never did. Your HOA built an empire on top of land it didn't legally own, and nobody ever checked the original chain of title. You bought access, not sovereignty." Her lips part, but nothing comes out. There's a moment when a person realizes the world isn't bending around them anymore. It's bending around someone else. She just reached hers. The officer looks up from the page. His entire posture has changed. Cops don't need training to recognize ownership. Authority recognizes authority, and this time, it isn't hers. The silence after the officer looks up from the deed isn't empty. It's charged, like thunder sitting behind bone, waiting for the sky to choose when to crack. His thumb is still resting on the legal seal, and though he hasn't said a single word yet, every homeowner watching can already feel the outcome shifting like a floorboard coming undone beneath their certainty. Delilah senses it too. Not in her head, not in her social arrogance, but deeper, the place animals feel danger before they can name it. She straightens her spine like she's trying to hold on to dignity using posture alone, but dignity is a currency she doesn't own anymore. "Not here, not now." "Officer," she manages, brittle as thin ice, "I'm going to ask you to remove him immediately." He doesn't turn toward her. He doesn't answer her. That alone is enough for the crowd to start pulling back emotionally. Instinctively, the way people step away from a sinking ship before they admit they're abandoning it. "Ma'am," the officer says finally, still not looking at her, "I need you to hold back until I verify jurisdiction. Jurisdiction, not trespassing, not removal, not enforcement. Jurisdiction, one word." And the entire foundation of her imagined authority fractures like a fault line. "You don't need to verify anything," she snaps, but her voice wobbles now. Too shrill, too desperate, stripped of its practiced control. "This is HOA land, and this dock sits below the high water mark," I say, not to argue, to finalize. which means you never owned the soil beneath it. You decorated it. You manicured it. You bragged about it. I tilt my head slightly. But you never owned it. A ripple moves through the crowd. Not noise, not outrage, realization. The kind that changes people's expression before they decide what side they're on. One man in a golf cap murmurs under his breath, "Is that possible?" A woman beside him answers without looking away from the deed tube. If it's recorded, yes. And that's when the fear in Delilah's eyes turns into something uglier. Not confusion anymore. Not disbelief, threatened power. The most dangerous kind. Because it doesn't know how to lose. "You listen to me," she seethes, voice low and venomous. This lake has belonged to this community for decades. We have maintained it. We have funded it. We have protected it. No, I say slowly. You have assumed it. Assumption is free until reality charges interest. The officer keys his radio, the static crackles. That tiny sound is all it takes for Delilah to feel the shift is no longer theoretical. It's becoming official. Panic blows through her composure like wind through brittle scaffolding. "Put that radio down!" She snaps. The crowd jerks slightly. HOA presidents don't tell police what not to verify, unless they already suspect what verification will prove. The officer finally turns his head toward her. Not submissive, not deferential, just calm, procedural, immovable. "Ma'am, I need you to step back. Right now." She freezes. Not out of obedience, out of shock. She's never heard a no. She couldn't buy her way through before. "I don't have to step anywhere. I am the HOA authority here. Not if you're standing on someone else's land," I say. Her jaw locks. She hates that the sentence landed. She hates more that everyone heard it land. The officer speaks into the radio, reporting parcel record citations, referencing basin control rights, giving coordinates, ordnance tags. Every word he speaks is another nail sealing the coffin of her illusion. When he finishes, he lowers the radio and looks at me differently than before, not as a subject of enforcement, but as the holder of standing. He hasn't even said the verdict aloud yet, but his body has. The lake breeze shifts, a light push of cool wind that carries the scent of wet cedar and fresh humiliation. Behind us, footsteps scuff as two more residents quietly step backward, like people who don't want to be photographed on the wrong side of history. Delilah finally finds a scrap of her voice again, but now it's smaller, less sharpened, desperation parading as fury. "You think this means you can just take everything? You think this means you can come in here and control the lake? This is a residential community. You don't belong here." I let her finish. Then, "Correction," I say. "You don't belong on the water without my permission." That hits harder than shouting could. The crowd doesn't gasp. They stop breathing because this isn't about the dock anymore. This is about the entire shoreline, the kayaks, the paddleboards, the private piers, the HOA-funded lighting, the floating gardens they brag about in property ads, the illusion of exclusivity that sells for an extra $1 million per house, all of it, built on something they never owned. Delilah steps forward, reckless move fueled by panic rather than reason. But the officer lifts his palm. "Don't," he says simply. Not a threat, a boundary, and not hers. She stares at him, like her reflection just cracked in front of a mirror. "You have no idea who you're siding against," she whispers, low and venomous, as if intimidation can still reverse a legal record. "I'm not siding," he replies. "I'm recognizing." Everything in her posture collapses half an inch, the first physical sag of real defeat. She covers it with anger. That document is meaningless. "We'll sue? We'll counterfile. The HOA will shut this down." "It would first have to own something to shut down," I answer. Her lips tremble, not out of softness, but rage that can't find purchase. And for the first time, her voice fails to reach the crowd behind her. She is no longer speaking for them. She is speaking in front of them, different. Stage, different power, different fallout. The officer turns to me. "Until verification comes back, I'm advising everyone to remain off the dock except the lawful holder of access." The lawful holder. He hasn't even gotten the call back yet, and she's already lost the presumption of ownership. She feels it now, the collapse, and panic makes her grasp for the last shield she has. But this community signed covenants. You can covenant the sky, I say, voice quiet but razor precise. Doesn't mean you own the clouds. Her face reddens, fury, humiliation, dread, all fighting for room under skin pulled too tight. You smug little... This isn't smug, I say. This is recorded. And recorded beats imagined every time. The officer lowers the deed tube to his side, not discarding it, not returning it, holding it like evidence belonging to the winning claimant. And that's when the rest of the crowd finally breaks from neutrality, heads turning toward her, toward each other, toward the water, realizing the implications are not symbolic. They are financial. They are territorial. They are structural, and they are hers to answer for. Not mine. Not anymore. Not angry, not outraged. Afraid. And that fear wasn't loud, it was cold. The kind that melts arrogance from the inside because it isn't humiliation yet. It's the awareness that humiliation is coming and nothing can stop its arrival. The officer still hasn't moved. The crowd is shifting in small, guilty gulps of distance, like people who suddenly realize the person they were standing behind is actually standing on a trap door, and all it needs is gravity to finish the justice. Delilah tries to salvage her voice, but her throat sounds like it's fighting itself. This is not over, she whispers, but it doesn't land like a threat. It lands like denial. I look at her without flinching. It's already over. You just haven't caught up to the ending yet. Her lips tremble in shock more than rage now, because for the first time in her entire HOA-built identity, someone isn't afraid of her. Someone she cannot fine, cannot threaten, cannot vote against in a committee meeting with pastries and power trips. Someone who doesn't live under the roof she rules. Someone who owns the ground she is standing on. She takes a half step forward like she still has authority. But the officer subtly shifts his arm between us, not defending me, not stopping her, just reinforcing reality. Proximity to me is now permission-based. She sees it, and something fractures behind her carefully staged poise. You don't understand this community, she says with a trembling sort of fake dignity. People rely on this dock, this access. They relied on the illusion that it was theirs, I answer. Not loud, not cruel, just final. You built your entire personality on policing property you never legally controlled. And now you're realizing the difference between ownership and opinion. A ripple of winces travels through her supporters. Not against me, but against recognition. They all feel it now. She isn't the authority, she's just the echo of one. The officer finally speaks, low and careful. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back from this area until the property owner authorizes public use. The word owner lands like a judicial hammer. Delilah's eyes go glassy wet, not with sadness, with ego collapse. You can't seriously be siding with him, she hisses. He doesn't belong here. He hasn't earned... He paid for the land, someone from the crowd interrupts, sharp and clean. That's earning it more than yelling at everyone who lives next to it. She whirls toward them like betrayal itself just spoke, but now there are too many eyes not with her. Fear is contagious when entitlement runs out of oxygen. She opens her mouth to snarl again, but I cut in before she can reclaim even a scrap of posture. You spent so long pretending to be a gatekeeper, I say slowly, that it never occurred to you whose gate it actually was. She stumbles over her words. You think this gives you power? No, I answer, calm as the lake surface behind me. It confirms I always had it. Her nails dig into her palms like she wants to scratch back control out of reality itself. We'll file injunctions. The HOA board, I correct, can request permission. Just like everyone else. The way her breath catches confirms she heard the status shift. Guest in a space she once believed she reigned over. She turns back to the officer again, like, maybe if she rewinds the moment, the law will develop amnesia. You're letting him dismantle years of community structure. The officer doesn't blink. Ma'am, Looks like the structure wasn't built on land you owned. Silence again. But this time, it isn't shock. It's acknowledgement. People aren't waiting to see if I'm bluffing. They're waiting to see what I do next. That is power, not force, not yelling, not signatures on memos. Power is when gravity tilts toward you because everyone knows the rules of the world just realigned, and you're the new center. Delilah finally breaks. The panic slips through the cracks in her voice like leaking steam. You can't restrict all lake access. You can't take something everyone depends on. I'm not taking anything, I say, stepping fully onto the dock, claiming it physically as much as legally. I'm reclaiming what I already own. If the community wants access, they can have it, under rules that respect the actual boundary lines instead of the fantasy ones you barked into existence. Her voice falters. You mean you'll make them pay? I look at her for a long moment. No, I mean I'll make them ask. The difference devastates her, because money wasn't what she built her throne out of. Control was, and permission destroys control faster than price ever could. She straightens, desperation clawing at her expression. This neighborhood has a culture, a standard, a level of civility. Civility. I repeat a slow, razor-edged echo. Is that what you call weaponizing fake bylaws to push people around? She opens her mouth, but I don't let her breathe through it. You didn't build civility. You built compliance. The crowd shifts again, not away from her this time, but around me. Loyalties don't need applause, and they just need gravity, and mine is now the only gravitational center here. Delilah tries one last angle, spitting it like poison. You're an outsider. I'm the owner, I correct, which legally makes you the outsider. On my shoreline. The ownership word punches harder than any insult. My shoreline. She hears it. The crowd hears it. The law hears it. The world has already rearranged itself, and now she's trapped behind the border of her own obliviousness. This is absurd, she breathes, shaking her head. People won't accept this. They won't stand for— They already are, I say, without even looking back at them. She glances over her shoulder instinctively and sees it. Nobody is nodding. Nobody is stepping forward to save her. The crowd doesn't boo her. They simply stop buffering her. Isolation always feels its sharpest when it arrives silently. She tries to turn righteous again, tries to salvage dignity out of scraps. You think this ends here? The HOA has legal teeth, then bite, I say flatly. But make sure your lawyer reads the deed before you embarrass yourself in front of a judge too. Saying, nothing is defeat, defending is losing slower. But she can't attack because she no longer has jurisdiction. That's when she breaks posture completely, voice trembling between fury and fear. Why would someone like you even want to own this? What's the point of buying this land? The answer is so calm it scares her more than shouting ever could. Because sooner or later, someone like you was going to try to decide who deserved it. The wind pushes lightly over the dock like punctuation. The water laps below like applause muffled through crystal. Nobody speaks because they all understand the subtext now. I didn't just buy shoreline. I bought hierarchy collapse. I bought the deed to consequences. I bought the lock to the gate she believed was attached to her voice instead of her jurisdiction. And she's finally discovering what happens when noise loses the microphone. Then I lean in just enough for only her ego to shatter under the closeness. You spent years making people feel small on land that never belonged to you, I say softly. And now you're the one standing here without a key. She doesn't respond, because there is no counter-argument to reality. Her entire power was a costume, and I just tore the zipper down the spine. She steps back, not because she wants to, because gravity makes her. Authority belongs to whoever the ground listens to, and the ground is listening to me now. The officer finally lowers his hand from his belt because there's nothing left to police. Balance has already been enforced by ownership itself. And that's when she realizes the real nightmare isn't losing control. It's knowing this is only the beginning of how much more she's about to lose.